Hi guys, welcome to another Get Ready with me. Today we are talking about academic integrity, bribing, comparing America and Russia, morality, religion, the fun stuff. So if you want to hear what me and my friends have been talking about when it comes to these subjects, and if you have some opinions of your own, stay tuned. Hey guys, I am getting ready to start my look today. So it is in the middle of our May holidays, and I spent the last weekend at the sea with a couple friends of mine, and we had some amazing conversations, like we do. There was a topic that was brought up that I've been a little hesitant to bring up publicly, but it was a very good question, so let's talk about it. The question came from my friend who is 21 years old. He is going to university. He is studying dentistry. He is in what you call in Russian a budget place. For my English speakers, that means he's basically there on a scholarship. He studies very hard. He's very motivated to be a dentist. In fact, one day he'd like to practice in America. And he asks me so many questions about what university is like in America and what it's like to get a medical profession in America and what it means, because there's lots of stories of like student loans and things like that. So the questions he asks me are very valid. And one of the questions he asked me was, what would happen in America if you tried to pay one of your professors for a good grade? Now, I just want that question to marinate for a second. For my non-Russians, I wonder what you think about that question. Could you imagine even asking that question? When I was in university, conduct of code was really important, and it was talked a lot about, and it was more about if you get caught cheating as a student. It was never brought up if you tried to bribe one of your professors. I wonder what they would have said if I had asked them, what would you do if I tried to pay you money for a good grade? Now, I can guess, and that's going to be my answer today. I believe, based on what I know about my own experience and about what they said about just cheating, I believe that if you tried to even offer your professor any money for a good grade in America, you would be immediately kicked out of school. Just for asking the question. I believe even for asking about it, you would be given a lecture on the value of the education, and to ask the question waters down and insults all the people that came before them, all the people that studied, all the people that hold the degree. It's an insult to the profession, to the institution, to education, and that you didn't deserve to be anywhere amongst them. I'm almost positive that's what the result would be. So why did my friend ask this question? I can imagine some of the comments I'm going to get from this video, but I will say with certainty that that is not a crazy question for a Russian to ask. I have lived in Russia for almost 16 years, and I have had many clients, including teenagers and people in university. And I have heard more stories than I can count of this type of behavior in Russian universities. My friend who is in a medical university said this doesn't happen with him. He doesn't know about it. He has never seen it. And I'm grateful for that. Many Russians would say they hate this about here because when you go to the doctor, you want to know that they have knowledge that they didn't pay for their documents. And I'd like to believe that it is getting better, but the culture still exists. And it doesn't just stop with professors, does it? I've had many Russians ask me, especially because they plan on going to America, what to do if they get stopped by a police officer. Can they offer them money? Again, I don't have personal experience here because that doesn't happen. I've never done that, never thought about doing that. But I imagine if you tried to do that, you'd be going to the jailhouse in handcuffs just for asking the question. Now, I want to take a moment to say, I am not trying to say that Americans are less corrupt than Russians or Russians are more bad than Americans. Because the truth is, people are people. And people don't like getting in trouble, and people like using money to solve their problems. I'm not going to say one side is worse than the other. I'm going to say that the flavor of corruption in America is different. It's not so in your face, it's not so obvious, and it's not really accessible to average people. But does it happen? Of course it does, because people are people. But there is a culture here in Russia that says there's the rules and then there's what we do. So another perspective. This is something I've never actually talked about in any public space, and I'm glad I can finally do this. I have not told you guys about why I moved to Russia until recently. I was married to a Russian man in America, and I moved to Russia with him. And the reason I never talked about it is because it was a highly abusive relationship. It was terrible, and it wasn't something I wasn't sure how to share publicly yet. My very first video I made on YouTube is about the story. If you want to know more, you can watch it. I'm fine. It was terrible. It was awful. I have moved on. There was a time when he was here in Russia and I was waiting for my documents, and I waited for them for about 8 months. And during those 8 months, I lived with his parents. And the reason I lived with his parents was to start to adapt myself to what I could expect in Russia. His mother was a highly religious woman, very sweet. I miss her tremendously. She was the only good thing about that whole relationship. That in Russia. And she taught me so much about what it meant to be Russian, but also what it meant to be Soviet, because she moved to America soon after Russia began. This woman is extremely religious, only wears dresses, never says a bad word, prays 10 times a day, devotes all her life to the church. And she had a very loose relationship with the law. She didn't feel compelled to follow the laws. She felt compelled to protect her family and do whatever was right for her family. And if that meant not following the law, so be it. In fact, she would consider if following the law hurt her family, she absolutely would not follow the law. And I thought, wow, this is so unusual, because in my experience in America, and to give you some perspective, I'm talking about South Carolina. This is Southern Baptist. This is heavily religious place. In this area, people who consider themselves very religious are also very law-abiding. Love of God and love of country kind of go hand in hand in this area. So the idea is you couldn't be a true Christian if you're someone who didn't follow the law. And here I have a different perspective of someone who is very religious, who didn't feel that way. I feel like I have to throw in another disclaimer. I am not trying to say that Russians are bad people. But what it does offer me is a view into another way of life. To get a little personal about myself, there are definitely times where I have felt laws were unjust, that they were created badly. Either they weren't well thought out, or it was obvious they were made to benefit one particular person in power. I myself have not enjoyed the idea of following those laws. And sometimes I've even broken them myself. In fact, what I know about people is people break laws all the time, all over the world, all the time. If we actually had to face the punishment for the laws we break, we would all be in jail, all of us, and we would have no money for the amount of fines we'd have to pay, whether it's crossing the street where you're not supposed to, or whether it's driving just a little too fast. I would dare say that these actions don't make you a bad person. I am not advocating for anarchy and breaking the law. I am simply saying, as it exists now, most people break some laws sometimes. And I don't think that means that we should all be punished for every single crime we do. Just like parents and children, we don't punish every single misstep a child does. There's some leniency there. And I think that we understand that laws are not enforced 100% of the time. One reason is because we can't, but another reason is because we shouldn't. And there are times when the laws create a rigid situation that creates a difficult situation for everybody. For example, there is a road near my house that cars park on the side of the road, I think legally because no one ever moves them, but because they do that, it creates a difficult place for cars to drive by. It's not a busy road, so people don't really mind. They just give space to whoever needs it. What if you followed the law exactly? What if you never crossed over that center line and you had to wait until all the cars have passed? If you followed the law exactly, one thing, you'd never move. And two, you would actually endanger people on the right side of the road who might be coming in and out of their cars. This is an example of rigid laws are not always best for everybody. There has to be wiggle room, a chance for you to use your judgment. So for example, in Russia, Russians are very strict on making sure that their documents are 100% accurate. If there is a typo, like for example, my name can be spelled two ways in Russian, Lora or Laura, depends on if you're doing it by letter or by the sound. For the record, it's Lora in Russian, as I chose to have it translated. If my document says Laura, it will not be accepted in many places. Even though it's very clearly me, it matches all my other documentation, every other piece of information is me, it will not be accepted. I saw this happen one time in migration. There was a woman, an old woman, coming from an old Soviet republic, I don't remember which one, and she brought with her her documents. And on her documents, she was doing her documents for her whole family. She had the right to migrate. She needed to migrate. She lived here. This was a necessary thing for her to do. And on one document that was handwritten from 20 years ago in a different country, well, not a different country, but a different part of the Soviet Union, they do have their own languages in each of these areas. One time, a last name was written with 2 L's instead of 1. Because of that one typo in a pile of documents like this, she was rejected. And there was nothing that they could do. The officer accepting her documents understood how unfair it was, but she was bound by rigid laws to not be able to do anything. There was no way for this woman to go back to whatever country she came from to have this document redone, especially because it was 20 years old. And she was given absolutely no way to solve the situation. And that would be the end of a terrible story if we didn't live in Russia. In Russia, there is always a way. I have said this comment in my comments before, and it has gotten many likes because people know exactly what I'm talking about. That officer may have been able to just take it and accept it, but it takes for her a big risk in doing so, because if that document gets seen by someone higher up than her, she might get in a lot of trouble. There's a risk there. When someone takes on a professional risk, they deserve to be rewarded for it. I'm not saying that that woman was looking for a bribe, but I'm saying a bribe probably could fix her problem. Everybody here knows this. These things happen in America as well. I myself have been through it multiple times where I needed to have a document fixed. It was not by mistake of my own, but there was a mistake that needed to be fixed and there was no process to fix it. That is a failure of the system that creates these rigid systems without ways to correct problems that inevitably come up. There was no system to correct a mistake. Mistakes happen. We're human. And if you don't create a way to fix those mistakes or find a way for solutions, we will find our own solutions. And in America, that solution required me yelling and yelling and yelling and yelling for over a year and a half to change my birth date from 01 to 10. If I had been in Russia, that mistake would have been easily fixed. Now, there are upsides and downsides to this system, I understand. I am not trying to advocate for one way or the other. I am simply trying to give you some perspective on what happens when you have these types of systems. In Russia, you do not want to have a doctor who paid for his degree. Hands down. But in Russia, you can pay to have a mistake on a document overlooked. In America, we have rigid standards about academic performance. So when you have a degree from a university, you can be sure that that person earned it. But on the other side, there's no flexibility when life happens. I want to go back to the idea, what if we were all punished for every crime we did? What if we paid a fine for every mistake we made? Could you imagine what situation we would be in, how we would live in such fear? And it's getting that way when you have cameras everywhere and oversight everywhere, everything that you do with your taxes. Do you have to file for that $50 that someone paid you to clean out their garage? Does that count as income? What if I don't do it right? If you live in a world where all laws are strictly enforced, we are all screwed. There's no mirror here. I don't know what I'm looking at. So I think the point of this conversation is you can be a morally good person who doesn't follow the law strictly, because none of us follow the law strictly. We just in different degrees follow it. And also, before you go to any foreign country, you should probably look up whether or not you should bribe a police officer before you try it. Just get advice. Okay, now for the hard part. So this is my final look for today. I don't know why I love talking about these really controversial subjects, but for me, I have amazing conversations where we talk about these things all the time, and I always feel like someone should be listening to us. So if you have comments, and I really hope you do, because there's a lot to say about this topic, let me know in the comments. You can come follow me on my Telegram. You can follow me on Instagram. The links are all in the descriptions, and I will see you next time.